Hello and welcome to a new Practical Sheets video on automation and spreadsheets in Practical Sheets. Today we're going to talk all about adding columns up. We're going back to basics and show you how to use basic functionalities and basic formulas to add a whole column of data. And we're going to show you several ways of doing this. So before beginning, I'll invite you to practicalsheets.com and the Patreon page where you can download these and more than 200 templates and ask me anything about Google Sheets, automation tools, and more. So let's begin, not without thanking all my Patreon subscribers. So let's go right through it. I have a table, very basic table of numbers. It could be units, values, sold values, anything you want that you want to add, or many of the things we're going to see today also apply to averaging, counting, and much more that we can see in separate videos. But today we're going to focus on adding. The easiest way of adding, especially if you want to consult or just see what is the sum of some numbers and you don't need it in a report or you don't need it in your sheets, is by looking at the lower right corner of your screen. Just selecting the numbers. We're going to select this. Actually, I'm going to, if you go down here, you can see that the result of summing or adding up all of these numbers is 305. You can actually use other ways of aggregating data as average, minimum, maximum, counting, and more. Another very simple way of doing this is selecting the column. We're going to data and then column stats. And here it's also a summary, a bit more detailed summary. And here you can see the sum of the numbers, and you can also see again the average, the minimum, unique values, total rows, and much more. So if you just want to see very quickly the sum of your data, either of these two ways could work really well. But I'm sure most of you want to add it up in another cell. It may be in the same sheet or in another sheet. So let's look at it. I'm going to close this and we're going to add with a formula. The most basic formula, almost an insult to people that have advanced, intermediate or advanced skills in Google Sheets, is just adding up, selecting with the plus operator and selecting each cell. But let me, for the sake of argument and exercise, let me go through the most basic up until the most complex. So we start here and we just select this B2 and click the plus button, and then B3 and click the plus button, and then B4, and so on and so forth. This has many disadvantages. The first one of them being that if you add a row up or down, then the intelligent feature of Sheets will move the row down, and if you want to add another value in this row, it won't take it into account. Okay, it's too manual for my taste, but it's, let's say, the most intuitive and the most basic way, especially if you're just starting with Google Sheets. This is called a formula. So we can evolve from this to a function, and the function that sums, it's very originally called sum. So the nice thing about sum is that first you could do it very similar to what we did the last time, but instead of the plus operator, we're going to use the comma to separate arguments. So again, I'm going to use B2, comma, B3, and then B4, and I hit enter. It automatically closes the parentheses, but it has the same limitations as before. The nice thing about sum is that you could give ranges to it. Actually, let's give it a bit more of zoom. What do I mean by ranges? Instead of writing B2, B3, and B4, I could write B2 column B4, and it will take all the range into account. And if I go further, it will be B2 column B10. So this will mean that it will, in just having a very short argument that is called a range, I can add a lot of cells. So instead of B2 to B4, I'm going to erase this, and I'm going to select all of this range, B2 to B10, and here you can see how it expresses it as an argument inside my sum formula. The nice thing about this way of adding up is that if I do the same thing I tried to do before, that is adding a row above and then writing something inside, my range will dynamically adapt. Remember that before it was B2 colon B10, or saying it in natural words, B2 up to B10. But when I add new rows, Sheets or Excel intelligently assumes that I'm growing my range, so it increases the range by 1. So it's not B2 to B10, but B2 to B11, and so on and so forth. This has also some limitations, especially in the lower and upper limits. If I add something above the row 2, so I would assume that it will also continue to add the row 2. But if I go to my formula, hit F2, then I see that it automatically changed to B3. And the same for if I write something down here in B13, 34, the range does not adapt. So this is the limitation. How do we work around this limitation? The first way of doing it is, let's go back to our B2, B10. And what I'm going to do is just remove the 10, B2 up to B. This is telling Sheets that you go up until the last row you find. In my case, it's row 1002. In your case, it could be another, but it will always be the last row. I hit enter, and this continues to work for any row I insert in the middle of my range, but it will also work if I add something here. So these adapt to the whole column. So if your question was, how do I add a whole column? Well, this is the answer. Except it won't work on this case when I add something here. So if you want it to work on that case, you have two options. The first one is just to remove both numbers. So it's just saying add the whole column. And you say, hey, but what happens with this number header? The nice thing about sum is that it ignores spaces and ignores texts. So it's a very nice solution. You could also do B1 up to B, and it will also work. And if you add new rows, it will always have these new rows into account. Okay? The only limitation that one of the limitations that this method has is that it's a bit non-efficient, because if you have 10,000 rows, it's trying to add 10,000 rows when we only have 14 rows with numbers. So there are a couple of ways of going onto this, let's say, caveat. And the first one is doing a more advanced formula using array formulas and a count if and all that, but I'm going to show you a better way. Before moving on to tables, sometimes you want to add in another sheet or in another different column, but sometimes you want to have the total in the same column. For example, you want to have it here at the end. So at the end, I won't recommend that, really, especially if you're not working with tables, because it creates an additional complexity. What I recommend is that you add a row above, and I've seen a lot of people doing it this way, and you can have your totals here. You can have 1, 2, or 3 rows up from your data. It's easier because it's as easy as writing again sum from B1 or B2, however you want, B2 or B3 up to B, and that's it. And then you can add however many rows you want inside your data, the top of your data and the bottom of your data, and it will always update. When you have it down, you always need to start calculating where is your total. In this way, your total will always be in the row 1. So it's a bit easier, okay? Before we finish up, I'm going to show you one of the new functionalities of Google Sheets that it's called, well, relatively new, called the table. And the table allows us to do a couple of things in an easier way. So let's go to a copy of the original data I have, and I'm going to convert it to a table. Just hitting format and then convert to table. And you may have seen this in the newer videos of Google Sheets. So the nice thing about this, there are two really great functionalities related to adding up. The first one, and it's fairly recent, is that you can go here to table formatting and activate this show table footer. And in the show table footer, you'll automatically add a new row, a new footer row, where it will add up the values of these and many other columns on all the columns you want. So remember I told you that it was a bad idea to put a total on the bottom. Well, here it's a good idea because Sheets automatically does it for you when you have a table. And if you add new rows, it will update automatically, and it's a very basic formula. Just remember this formula because we're going to discuss it in a couple of minutes, okay? And the nicer thing about this that we'll discuss in another video is that you could group. You can say here group by column, and it will also have subtotals. Not only adding up, you could, instead of average, that is the default, you can have sum, and you can not only have the total, but also the subtotals. But again, this is the matter of another video. I'm going to exit this group view. And the last thing I want to show you is that we can do something very similar to what we did at the beginning of the video. We can have a total here, but when I do sum, that we've already discussed it, and I select all of my row, you can see that here it changes. It's not the notation we know that is B2, B12, but it changes to table one number. This is basically table notation, which means all of the data in my table one table in my number field, that is the column B. The nice thing about this is that it's more efficient than the other method without the number, because it will always auto-calculate. It's a dynamic range. It will always auto-calculate how many rows it has. So it's not trying to add 1,000 rows like the other formula did. It's just adding the 10 or 11 rows I have here. So if I add 3 more rows, it will add the 14 rows, and that's it. If you're using tables, this is the most efficient way of doing this. And that's it. There are several ways of adding up entire columns. I'm sure there are many more. At least just let me know if you know any other in the comments. And what we're going to see in next videos is adding a conditional with some ifs, counting, sum product, and other of these basic formulas that will give us all the basics to become masters of Google Sheets. Thank you so much, particularly to my patrons. See you next time.